Welcome to Rails, Ales, and Old Towns. On today's show, we're off to the City of Light, taking a look at Paris through a pint glass. My guest is longtime Paris resident Michael Kennedy, founder of one of the city's leading craft breweries, Paname Brewing Company. Michael gives me the lowdown on how Paname came to be, the unique building the brew pub is located in, and of course, its beers, before getting into some interesting alternative Parisian history that just so happens to tie back to the brewery. Then Michael offers up some advice on hidden gems and some great places to savor a sunset. Suffice to say, if you enjoy craft beer and you're passing through Paris anytime soon, this one's for you. All right, let's go to Paris.
Mind the gap between the train and the platform.
All right, let's welcome to Rails, Ales, and Old Towns, founder of Paname Brewing Company in Paris, Michael Kennedy.
Well, hi, Scott.
First and foremost, I want to say congratulations. You're the first Australian to appear on the podcast.
Well, thank you very much. Us Australians, we like to get around wherever we can, all over the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the main reasons I wanted to talk to you is because my wife and I are putting together a trip. I think we're going to have a bit of a time in Paris, and I'm researching ahead. And just when I discovered your brewery and this terrace you've got on the water, I was like, this place looks like the exact kind of place I want to hang out. So first off, I guess if you could just tell me a little bit, like, how did you find yourself in Paris from Australia and founding Paname Brewing Company?
Well, I'll give you the quick version, but 25, 30 years ago now, I was, student in Australia, hotel management. I was big fan of wine, really. Fan of beer as well, of course. But I grew up in a little pub in a country town of Australia called Waruka of about 150 people. So I think the whole beer business, running bars, restaurants is something in my family. My whole family's pretty much involved in the industry. Wines, a lot of them are involved in the wine industry in Australia. I think from there, I just, was looking for new challenges, went to Europe. I think I always wanted to come to France, bit of an adventure, and studied more about wine. I think wine and jazz, they were a couple of my things at the time. So Paris seemed like the place to develop those interests.
You couldn't find more of, when you put the Venn diagram of saying you love jazz and you love wine than to be in Paris.
I was an old saxophone player in my day, well, I thought I was anyway. But, and then I came to Paris after I worked in the south of France, but ultimately I loved Paris and wanted to live here and saw some opportunities to open businesses. And I think using the skills of being a foreigner really gave us some sort of advantages of knowing new trends, whether it be American, English, Australian, new food styles, things like that. I think we always gave us a little angle that the French probably weren't playing on. So I think same as the beer, the original initial idea was probably based on some holidays in Australia and just seeing the evolution of craft beer and bars that are dedicated solely to craft beers, craft ciders, and really booming. London as well. I was involved in a bar there for a little while. And just everybody was drinking local produce. It was all craft. And I thought, wow, there's a real movement going on here. And I thought it was, a great opportunity to bring something like that to Paris, which wasn't really being done at all. There's a few little small breweries, which probably not so much what you call craft brewers, but artisanal, so the little old guy in his garage still making some beers and things like that, and that still exists, but probably fewer and fewer people being able to survive in that. But anyway, so basically that was the basis of the whole Paname concept. There was an opportunity here, and the fact that I've been involved in bars and restaurants, I think it gave me an edge of doing a brewery and also doing a cool bar, so a cool bar. We found a great location on the water, so you can sit out on this floating pontoon, see the sunset, and drink a couple of nice beers, and we also recruited some great brewers over the years as well to sort of, which is very important.
The space that you've got, if you could just tell me a little bit more about it.
Firstly, finding a space like that in Paris is quite rare. And I think what is funny is that place had been up for sale for, 18 months and no one seemed to want it. But I think it was just the perfect site for us because it was also the 19th of Paris, which was traditionally the toughest, gnarliest area in Paris, 10 years ago, and I think when we started, there was a rough edge to it, but since we were there, the area kind of transformed, well, especially in that little enclave around what's called the Bassin de Villette. It was like a waterfront there, which we'll get into, I suppose, as well. But the site itself, concept was, like I said, using those experiences from London, Australia, overseas, America, always looking for the big warehouse, the sort of the typical place you'd find in the States. You can't really find those here, but this one had high ceilings, views on the water. Then we sort of went with this very much that industrial sort of Shoreditchy kind of style thing. And also the fact that my Australian heritage is that whole coffee shop culture,
Sure.
which was not something happening in France. And I was probably trying to infuse the design and style of a coffee shop, but put a brewery in it. So we were try to hit that perfect spot between the two, where it's kind of cool coffee shop vibe. You can come in the afternoon, chill, read a book, drink a beer, have a coffee, whatever. And there's also brewing going on in the background. So that with some nice decor and a beautiful view, it's just made it it's a very magical place.
Yeah, and that's, I think what is great about that is, there might be some traditional people who say, well, that's not Paris, that's not, but I think it is so important that we have to remember in these European cities that cities are modernizing too, and you can't, everything's not going to be a traditional brasserie and this, that, and the other thing with seats facing the street and all that. Like, there's going to be modern stuff too, and so you balance things. You go to a brewery like Paname, and then you go to a traditional place as well.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think every city has, you need the new stuff. It was our food concept as well, was very modern street food, and I think it was a time when that was still quite rare, that sort of, going for a good a lot of Asian food and stuff like that all over the world is multiculturalism, and I think we try to bring that to the place as well, but it's also beer food.
We've got to talk about the name because this
Okay.
name Pan Am, we've got to explain how this came about and how that ties in with the city.
Okay, well, Panam, the name Panam is a very cult name in France. It doesn't always resonate with foreigners, but Panam, and actually it stems back to the initial attempts at building the Panama Canal, which was financed by the French. But then there was a bankruptcy thing. It was a huge scandal across France. So it was the talk of the town, but also a lot of people were always relating to the people from Panama, that they were very elegant, like the French, and they sort of there's this sort of relationship between the Panamanian and their hat and their stylish look and Paris. It is a reference to Panama at the end of the day. Okay, and that was in the early 1900s. So it was called Paname. So Paris, what is good? There's a peripheric around Paris today, which is the technical side of Paris. But in the older days, Paname was kind of that Paris, but also a little bit further northeast. It was very working class. And it was where all the, and all the gangsters, all the gangsters are out there. Sort of, there's a real hardcore edge to Paname. So it's also made a bit of a comeback. The rappers use the word a lot. It's a very underground young people thing. So it's a very kind of cool expression. It's like, the Big Apple for New York. Paname is Paris to France.
Okay.
A lot of our branding of the names of the beers are from what the Belle Epoque. There was a gang, the most notorious gangs of France were called les Apaches, as in like American Apaches, because they were wild, and they basically outnumbered the police in the early 1900s, and they were typically they were just gangs, and everyone had a like a little tattoo under the eye, and that's called an Œil de Biche, which was the name of our original pale ale. It's it was sort of like a gang from the Apache, and then there's the wheat beer is actually called the Surin. Surin was the knife they used to use. They used to have a special blade that was also brass knuckles, a blade, a gun. Yeah, they had all these crazy weapons, and it's honestly, when I sort of discovered the name Pan, well, it actually came from whole concept. I was watching Gangs of New York one night, and I thought, I wonder if there's Gangs of Paris, and I typed in Gangs of Paris, and then this world of information just unfolded before my eyes of sort of gangs and stories and words and languages and dances, and there's it's incredible. There's a real deep story there.
You mentioned, some of the brewers, that you brought in. Are there any stories there?
Our first brewer, Benedict Steger, who owns a brewery today called Blech Brut, which is he's an incredible brewer who'd studied in the V&B Berlin brewing school, which is one of the top, more avant-garde brewing schools around the world. And he's a real technician, good guy, and just very creative. And he can do classic German beers, but he can do triple IPA, over the top stuff as well. And I think we learned a lot going along the road with him, because he just kept every week he was producing a new beer, which was kind of new to us as well. And you realize that in today's brewing society, you can't just make one beer, you can't one beer and hope you're successful. You've got to excite customers. You've got to give them, there's new fashions coming in. People are always looking. The idea is, you come to the bar and you can always try something new. The IPAs, everybody's doing IPAs, and it's all Napers. And now, there's, sours, and I feel like we're doing a bit of a circle back to some German styles now. And I think there's seasonal, but there's different trends as well. And I think it's sort of tapping into that without letting it dictate who we are. I think is kind of what we attempt to do anyway.
So, what were some of your, most popular beers, or ones you're really proud of?
We've got a really nice, easy drinking Naper called Django. But yeah, so the Naper is a good one. I think our go-to IPA is the Barge du Canal, is by far our biggest seller and always has been. We were always wanting to pimp it a bit and modify it, but it seemed like it's kind of an old school IPA, sort of West Coast or English kind of IPA. So it's quite classical, and quite a bit amber. But I think it seems to be accessible to everybody. Do you know what I mean? It's a good, tasty IPA, but it's not. There's a lot of people who have gone very heavily into sort of almost sweet, fruity things like that. We sort of stayed away from that a little bit. I think there was a lot of people delving in that, which is kind of nice. We'll do one every now and then, but we sort of try to keep to more drinkability, because we've got outlets as well, and we want people to be, we want them to be drinking 3 pints and not one. We still do the funky stuff, imperial stouts and things like that, but they're well, when we get the time as well. It's always about finding space in your brewery to be able to experiment and do other alternative beers and things. We have two breweries, where we have the small brewery in the 19th, which is really not big enough to supply the beer all year round, especially in summer. So we have a production site. Now we've just moved to Saint Denis. So in Saint Denis, we have better equipment. We can, centrifuge and some things that we didn't have in the small brewery. So it actually limited it a little bit to what we can do.
I've got to give you praise for having an American wheat.
Very unique, actually. And I think it's a really interesting subject, because there's a real conundrum here, because in France, a wheat beer, they call it a blanche, but blanche meaning white. But the minute you say blanche, it's an association with a Belgian wheat.
Yep.
So we have even people with our American wheat wanting to call it a blanche. And then for them, of course, it doesn't taste like a blanche, because it doesn't have the coriander, sort of orange peel, the citrusy, the flavors that go with the Belgian wheat. So and even if we want to do a German wheat, they'll still call it a blanche. So there's a bit of a confusion, and I think that's why we thought the American wheat was kind of unique, and also a good compromise, because it wasn't sort of flavored by heavy yeast addition. It gave us a really clean, nice, crisp beer, and I think we thought that was a nice alternative.
I'm a huge wheat beer fan. I love the Belgian wheats. I love the American wheats. I love the German wheats. I'm not an expert on the American craft beer revolution, by any stretch, but I feel like the wheat was one major flagship beer of a lot of American breweries that really exploded in the 90s. Like, I'm from the Midwest, and there was a brewery called Boulevard Wheat. There was a Widmer Brothers on the West Coast that was huge. And when I moved to Europe, and whenever I would get my hands on an American wheat beer, it would just taste like home. and so I just zeroed in on yours, and I'm looking forward to sipping that.
Well, I look forward to getting your opinion anyway. So no, it's a great beer. Like I said, it's crisp and clean, and
In the 19th arrondissement, that's where you're brewing. You're still brewing.
that's our flagship brewery, but it brews for itself basically, and we can do some special kegs to take to another bar or something like that are there. But ultimately, it's a self-sustainable brew pub. It was our original brewery in 2017, and then we installed a much bigger brewery in Pantin. But that was unfortunately a site that we couldn't keep independently, so we had to move to another site, which is now Saint Denis, but it's a much bigger site, and that also has a bar, and we'll eventually have space for events and parties. It has a beer garden, stuff like that. But that's open. But we're still work in progress, getting the restaurant up and running or fine tuning it. It's not the obvious touristic site at this stage, although you can catch the metro out there, and it's a 10-minute walk, so it's quite doable. And we'll soon be setting up tours and visits and stuff like that. But yeah, you can come out for beer, you can come out for a feed and see the brewery. The brewery's it's a beautiful big 40 hectoliter state of the art brewery. It's in a great old building. It's got some cachet, and it's definitely worth a visit if you're a beer enthusiast. But but the 19th arrondissement that's sort of it's a spot in Paris. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's a place to come and it's great food's great. Sort of like I said, upmarket street food, quality across the board. We have great coffee, great beer, great food. Well, it's what we attempt to anyway. So.
Mind the gap between the train and the platform.
All right, well, I hope you're enjoying the show and it's helping you get fired up for your next European adventure. Thanks for listening to Rails, Ales, and Old Towns. As always, be sure to check out the link in the episode description for more information on some of the places discussed. Oh yeah, if you're digging the show, I'd be forever grateful if you were to leave a review or a rating on whichever platform you're listening on, as it does go a long way. And if you really want to get crazy, why not give me a follow on Instagram and Facebook at Rails, Ales, Old Towns for more Europe travel inspo and the occasional hit of European travel news. All right, let's get back to Paris.
Mind the gap between the train and the platform.
I'm looking at the map, and you're not too far from the major rail stations.
And also the site in Saint Denis, we're also about a 20-minute walk to the Stade de France. So when there's big concerts, big football games, big rugby games, it's like you can come there, have a few beers, and then go to the stadium, see a match, see a concert, then come back, have a few more beers, and then go home safely. So there's a huge development. Saint Denis, it's still in its early days, but they're building. They built a lot of stuff for the Olympics. So there's a whole development of new companies, new business, new infrastructure, new hotels. So and there's a university up the road. There's loads of stuff just happening in that area. So it's like getting in now. It's like it's going to become a great area because in the end it's very close to the center of Paris. It's between La Chapelle. Yeah, it's a 10-minute walk from the extremities like Porte de la Chapelle from Paris, walking just one straight up the main road there. And then the Stade de France. So it's very accessible, and which is kind of important. I think if we're going to build site and you want people to come, then they've got to be able to get there. So, and like I said, there'll be new in 5 years' time. There'll be 3 or 4 new lines that will be in that general area. So it'll be easier and easier as we get on.
You ever do any watching football or rugby in Paris?
Oh yeah, I'm become a big rugby fan. Actually, I love rugby. I think they're a great crowd as well. The rugby people are non-violent, bizarrely, and good fun. Very, very, countries from all over the world. Like during the World Cup, we go out and have. I think there was a South Africa Ireland game, which was one of the most incredible things ever I've seen in my life. And I think they drank the most beer in a place that in France has ever heard of, was one thing. So good day for beer sales. But after, no one left for 30 minutes and everyone was singing, all these classic old Irish songs, sort of Zombie and it just went on and on. And it was just like an electric, it was like one of those, I was there when that happened.
Zombie by the Cranberries?
By the Cranberries, yeah. The whole crowd just stayed there and you couldn't not sing. It was really an amazing experience.
But yeah,
Anyway, that's
rugby's big in
rugby.
France.
Rugby's big in France, yeah, and like I think it's becoming bigger and bigger, and like anything, they've been a very good team for the last 10 years or so as well. So I think that helps, and the French people are like very becoming more and more into it. Rugby itself is growing all over the world. I think.
I'm trying to get into it. I'm trying to get into rugby. And I guess I should ask you a little bit about, this Maison de la Villette that you're on. That was a former like shipping. It was to bring supplies into to Paris.
Absolutely. The actual building we are in was originally what was called a magasin général, and there's a few of them around France where they would store supplies. And there's a whole series of canals all over France, actually built by Napoleon for transporting within France. So that place, which is called the Bassin de Villette, which is the Ourcq River to the north, and to the south is the Canal Saint-Martin. And so this place is where all the boats would come in, load up, and there was docks all around the bassin. There was docks and storage areas. The building we're in was actually, they'd store wine, coffee, flour, sugar, malt, all the wheat and stuff like that, to be stored there, centralized, and then transported to different parts of France. So yeah, it's a transport hub. So it's pretty incredible, when if you look at the depth of how far people can go with that whole setup. So man-made.
Yeah, so it's a modern brew pub, but you're sitting on a bit of history there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's like I said, it really is where the malt was shipped in there. So so it's not like we haven't created a story around it. There was one that already existed. So, and which we're very lucky to stumble across that place.
When you're sitting out on the terrace enjoying a beer, what's your go-to food order?
My go-to food order. Well, it depends on having a full meal or just sometimes a snacky thing. Well, I love a little plate of charcuterie, which is always kind of a nice, easy just thing. We do a nice little karaage chicken. We do some dardinho, little Brazilian smoked halloumi and tapioca bites with a spicy barbecue sauce. Finger food. I think I kind of like having food where you can drink your beer in one hand and have your food in the other, and not have to sort of sit down and pull your knife and fork out. And as trying to keep it to that very laid back idea of having a great food and drink experience without having to make much effort. So
I've never met a dish with halloumi in it that wasn't great.
Yep. Exactly. Well, this is a good one, actually. It's kind of it's a Brazilian street food. So we've got a mixture of chefs from all over the world. So everybody's bringing what they have to the table. Everybody's trying to get their country on the map as well, which is nice. So it keeps it fun and interesting. And
would I be able to find Paname beer anywhere else in Paris?
We work with all of the big distributors in France. So, our concept was always, we found this bar restaurant site, which was a great way for us to get our foot in the door. But the ultimate project was always to create a really good quality French beer brand, specifically Parisian, thinking there's hopefully we can grow that all over the country, and then who knows, maybe internationally. There's hundreds of bars and restaurants in France that have our beers.
If, something terrible happened to someone and they couldn't make it in to one of your breweries or brew pubs, there is a chance they could be at a bar absolutely. In Paris and just see one of your labels behind the bar.
Yeah. No, I think we've working with, we've got a great sales team. We're trying to get us into some big pub groups and things like that, French cafes and bistros. So I think, we're getting more and more out there. Yeah, we're in a lot more new bars at the moment. I think this summer specifically, we've really had a good bit of an uplift. So I think you should be able to find us quite easily anyway. So,
but go on down to the brewery. I mean, that's the goal.
Yeah, come to the brewery. That's where the action is.
And this on your labels, that bridge, that's right by the brewery.
That is right by the brewery. Yeah, that's sort of it's also kind of a Gustave Eiffel bridge as well. There's two bridges actually. There's one either side of the brewery, but that bridge itself is just behind the brewery, and it's ponton montant, so it's a rising bridge. It lifts up for boats to go under, and it was built, I think, the 1874 or something like that. And there was a huge big manifestation with the origins of the Communist Party. It was called Les Communards. So there was a big uprising of the communists, which was very much, that's the whole 19th. East Paris is very much, the extreme left sort of foundations of the French Communist Party, Karl Marx, all that. There was a whole big movement there, and I think they burnt the original bridge down. So, and that was the one that replaced it.
And this was designed by Gustave Eiffel.
I believe, I think I might get caught out with some technical technical
Well,
stories today, but
if it wasn't him, it was somebody just as cool.
exactly, yeah. No, well, yeah. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's Eiffel or his company. All the bridges in Paris are pretty much Eiffel. I think any of them with the metal structure. So
That's a good transition point because, let's say we've come to Paris, we've done the big things that are on everybody's list: the Eiffel Tower, the Louvre. You've lived there a long time, 20 plus years now, right?
25 plus, definitely.
Yeah. What are some things, maybe just a couple little hidden gems that you wouldn't mind sharing? First, I'm going to ask you about the jazz scene in Paris because that's something that has always fascinated me. Just that jazz era, Paris, early part of the 20th century, and a lot of the jazz musicians have kind of congregated there, and that you can still see that a bit in the city. I feel like.
Yeah, no, it's still there. It's probably died down over the last 20 years, but I feel like maybe it's starting to rear its head again. I think there was jazz clubs all over the place, when I first came here, and it was quite normal to go out on a night and go to a jazz club. It was could be a pricey affair though, it's very much but they take it so seriously. You go to a bar and no one can talk, so it was very much concert driven. So, but I think it's becoming a little bit more mainstream now. You can find jazz music. The French music scene is definitely not the highlight of France. I think there's a lot of restrictions because there's small bars, neighbor problems, and things like that. So the real clubs are purists. There's places like the New Morning, Duc de Lombard. These places are institutions for jazz. A lot of the big ones over the years, where a lot of the famous, New Morning's probably the most famous one, I think, where all of the big names have played over the years. But there's lots of little ones and unknown artists all over the place. Yeah, a few days ago was the Fête de la Musique, which is a big thing in France on the 21st of June every year, and that's for a jazz lover. That's the time to be here. There's just there's music everywhere, every street. Not all good and it's not all jazz, but you can still get a great musical experience. There's so many museums and things like that. There's a great little museum in the Marais of Paris, for example, and there's old signs and stuff like that. That's kind of one of those light, easier, accessible. When it's nice to just go into a museum for an hour or two and not have to. The Louvre is like a full day event, so there's a lot of nice little things like that. There's one thing I think is actually pretty cool for something a little different, that's a little arty. And it's in the 13th, which is kind of the Chinatown of Paris. There's all these, it's kind of a new area and lots of buildings. There's a lot of big, not necessarily attractive buildings. They've brought in these artists from all over the world, and they've got these giant wall paintings, murals, like taking up whole buildings. And there's actually tours. You can go around and visit from site to site, and like to do a full day or half day, whatever, walking. But there's incredible artworks, very modern, sort of cool stuff all over the buildings in the 13th. So that's kind of something a little different. After that, the museums, well, that's kind of an endless thing. There's the Musée Jacques-Marandré. There's lots of little private, where they have, there's places that have those little private collections, which can be incredible, when somebody's just accumulated this, but they're a little less known. Jacques Marandré is one of those.
And what type of museum is that?
It's a bit of everything, It's like they've got some contemporary stuff, but a lot of it's a little older, sort of 18th century, 17th century. Yeah, you can find some Renoir.
Any favorite places to watch a sunset? Because that's one of my favorite things to do in Paris. It never fails to give you goosebumps. Montmartre is a very popular place, but anywhere else that you know?
But yeah, well, I think Paris has got, you can kind of tell a story of every neighborhood really, but Paname itself is a great place to watch a sunset because it actually goes down across the water. That's kind of nice. There's a bar that sells our beer, by the way, called Cargo Container Bar, and it's kind of a clubby sort of. It's only a summer pop-up bar, but it's on the Seine, and it sits there, and you've got the Eiffel Tower behind you, and the sun. You can see the Eiffel Tower, the Bibliothèque Nationale Française, and you get this sort of sunset over the Seine, and that's quite rare. Probably the other places over near the bridge Invalides. There's the Invalides building, and there's a beautiful Pont Louis Philippe, I think it's called, is between the Invalides, which is where Napoleon's tomb is, and then the other side you've got the Grand Palais and the Petit Palais, which are the most beautiful buildings, some of the most beautiful buildings in France, actually, that do galleries. And I think even during the Olympics, they did the fencing in there. They're just, it's a big glass domed beautiful building and stuff like that. So if you're on that bridge there, I think you get a pretty good, you get all of the splendor of Paris from the old days, and the Eiffel Tower in the background. And I think that's probably would be my best suggestion if you wanted to watch the sunset.
What do you like most about living in Paris?
Paris is, as opposed to, London, there's an intensity in London and New York. Paris can have that occasionally, but sometimes it's kind of quite chill. I think it's, many people say that, Paris is the best place in the world to live, but it's the worst place in the world to work. So working's hard, everything's complicated and stuff like that. But there's always great restaurants, there's always shows. It's not a pressured life, there's not that intensity that you'll find in some other big cities. It's very much, that they've still got a bit of that old, everybody shuts down at lunchtime, everybody goes and has their cool lunch, and that's kind of an accepted part of the culture, which is, it can be frustrating, but also can be nice. Sometimes it's like things slow down, and it's okay to slow down and just take time off, turn your phone off, just enjoy life for a couple of hours, and, and just, recuperate a bit. And I think that's probably the nice thing. And, if I ever do move back to Australia one day or somewhere else, I think things like that will be what I'll miss about Paris. Paris has got, and just walking around is just that, constantly having these incredible buildings and views and things like that of just, reek of history and things like that. I think that's it's just quite special, and I think there's the magical side of Paris is, even when you're here all the time, you still see, you drive past a building and think, wow, that's incredible.
Those moments don't fade.
They don't. No, I'm surprised that, you wouldn't get bored with it like any other city. You can get bored with certain things, but but it doesn't. No. And, and the more I'm here, the more I understand French culture. Sometimes you get a little confused about why they do certain things and the way they do it. But, honestly, as you get to know their history and the depth of the people and their own personal complex history with, and socialism and politics and stuff like that, is the way they react from foundations that go much deeper. And I think learning that is kind of interesting. I feel like I'm learning every day. I learn more here. I'm constantly evolving.
I think we'll leave it there. And I just want to say thanks for joining me. Looking forward to stopping by soon and having a beer on this terrace on the water in the 19th.
Okay, well, thanks for having me. Look forward to catching up in Paris, and we can have finish these conversations with more depth over a wheat ale.
All right, thanks, Michael. I really appreciate you talking to me.
Thanks for your enthusiasm about craft beer.
It's easy.